The seller says they're a former repair technician getting out of the business. He thinks there are 2 complete and 1 partial console here. Looks like he was focusing on fixing white lighted death PS4s. I have a great record with white lighted death PS4s, so I'm hoping we can fix all 3 of these. Let's get the box opened up and see what we got. This video is sponsored by Whatnot. More on them in a minute. Now, I was buying these from a random seller on eBay, but apparently he's a fan of the channel. So thanks, Joel, for selling me your PS4s. I hope I can fix them for you. Lots of packing paper, that's always nice to see. Now, the seller said all of the disk drives are included, but unfortunately they're not currently matched up with the PS4s they came in, and PS4 motherboards and disk drive are a match set, so you can't mix and match them, so I'm gonna have to figure out which disk drive goes with which motherboard. I always appreciate when eBay sellers take pride in what they're doing and package things nicely. Okay, and let's have a look at the boards. Can already see we've got some work on this HDMI chip over here. HDMI port is missing, which is fine. Obviously, we're gonna need to put in the perfect amount of thermal paste on these. That was probably the only problem with these. And another board. This one has the HDMI port still installed. Looks like it's been replaced. It's at least been heated around here. I don't know for sure if the chip itself has been replaced. And then we have the last board. This HDMI port has been replaced, and the chip has also been replaced, it looks like. Now that we got these all unboxed, we just need to pick one to start with, and I'm gonna pick the one that has the HDMI port missing. Let's start with this board and see if we can fix number 1. So on this PS4 motherboard, the first thing I notice, other than the fact that the HDMI port is missing, is we have 1, 2, 3, 4 little components right over here that are missing. So we'll need to install those. And then we'll need to inspect this chip and the soldering all around it to make sure that all looks good. I don't think this one's been replaced. It looks like none of this soldering has been redone. So I don't think the chip itself has been replaced. But let's first get started by installing an HDMI port. Now, these are the HDMI ports that the seller sent with the console. And these are actually brand new ports, but if you notice, on this one, there's kind of some solder stuck to these mounting pins. So what it looks like to me is the seller probably tried to install these, but it looks like they didn't get very far. And judging by the condition of this solder, I think the reason they didn't is because they didn't have enough heat on the board. So I'm going to use my hot air soldering station and show you what that looks like. And now you can see these mounting pins have rounded off nicely. The solder fully melted and bonded to the pins and the board itself. So now this port is on here nice and tight. And looking on the top side, all the pins on the port are lined up nicely with the pads on the board. Now we just need to get under a microscope and solder each of these pins to the corresponding pad. Now, in order to solder each of these pins on, I'm going to come through and put some flux on each of these pins. Flux just helps the solder flow. So once I touch my iron to the pin, the solder on my iron will stick to the pin, and that will also stick to the pad on the board. I have to do that for each of these 19 small pins. Once I'm done with that, then we'll get to replacing these components over here on the edge. Now, during this repair, you'll notice that I bridged some of the pins. So in order to remove some of that solder, I just came in with a little bit of solder wick and kind of sucked it up, but then that actually removed a little too much solder. So then I had to go back in with my small soldering iron and add a little bit of solder to the pin and the pad, and that created a nice strong joint. Then all there was left to do was give it a good cleaning and test all the pins. So now we need to install these components right here on this board, and we're going to remove those from this donor board. I'm going to be using my hot air soldering station to remove them, and then installing them over here onto this board. One of my new favorite ways to buy things online is through an app called Whatnot. Whatnot is a live auction selling platform that makes auctions fun again. It's sort of like a mix between eBay and Twitch. One of the great things about Whatnot is it's specifically built for live auctions. Now, before Whatnot, you could do live auctions on some of the other social media platforms, But the problem is they're not built for it. So collecting payments is annoying, shipping is annoying. It just makes everything more difficult. Whatnot is built specifically for live auctions, so payments are easy, shipping's easy, and bidding is easy. One of my favorite things about it coming from a seller's perspective is there are no non-paying bidders. On other platforms that I'm not going to mention, eBay, bidders could bid up the price of an item and then they could just not pay for it. On Whatnot, buyers are required to have a verified payment method, and when they win an auction, that payment method is automatically charged. Now, from a buyer's perspective, Whatnot is amazing because all sellers are photo ID verified. That means that you're way less likely to get scammed, unlike on some other online auction platforms. I'm loving Whatnot, and I think you're gonna love it too. I'll put a link to Whatnot right in the description so you can go check them out. Now we've got all these components mounted on here. They're definitely not perfect, especially this guy right here. He's a little crooked, but he's soldered on there all the way, and it has a nice solid joint, so it's nothing to worry about. Replacing these with hot air can be a little bit difficult because you run the risk of melting the HDMI port right here, since the back of it is plastic, and I did melt it a little bit right here, but that's not a big issue. Now that we've got this board all fixed up, let's see if we can piece together one of these PS4s and start it up and see what happens. This is the first case I've got in my stack, so let's start with this one and see if we can fit all the parts in and get the motherboard in and see what happens when we try and turn it on. So first things first, we got to get this fan clean. It is very dirty. The rest of the case is pretty dirty as well, so let's get this thing cleaned out a little bit and then we can start the assembly. Now I was going to use one of the black cases, but since the board that I'm working with is SAAB001 model, I'm actually going to put this into the white shell since that's an 1115 model. The SAB001 I think is the 1115 model of PS4, so I'm going to put this into that white shell. And here's the heatsink for that white shell. We definitely need to clean this. I actually really enjoy cleaning these because it doesn't take much to make them look so much better. Just get this big glob of dust and hair off of the heatsink. And then already, I mean, it still needs more cleaning, but it looks so much better already just with that. This is really clogged. And now with this heatsink cleaned out, we can go right down here. And there we go. Getting a little worried about some of these PS4s. This one's got corrosion all over here. I'm not sure that all of these are matching sets. I mean, all we really need is the motherboard and the disk drive to match. So all the rest of these pieces can kind of mix and match, but the disk drive board and the motherboard have to match. So I'm hoping we do have match sets, but I'm not convinced. We'll see. And now we'll clean off all the old thermal paste to make room for the perfect amount of new thermal paste. And now that we have that, this PS4 is definitely gonna work. Now we need to replace these thermal pads right here. There needs to be one of these for each one of these RAM chips on the board. These old ones are not in good condition, so I'm just gonna scrape these off and we'll install new used ones. And now with those installed, we can install this board into the chassis. Now, I don't know which disk drive goes with this board, but this disk drive looks like probably the revised one. It's got the BDP025 up here instead of having the numbers printed down here. So I think this is probably a newer model disk drive, just like the 1115 is a newer model of PS4. So I'm just gonna give this a try. Hopefully it'll work. Okay, and here we go. Let's see if it's gonna power on. Okay, we got a blue light on the top right here. Is it gonna get a signal? Come on. Okay, it's restarting, fine. Come on, give us a signal. It's got like a dark screen right here, but nothing's coming up so far. Now we do have a white light and it is fully started up. The fan works. We don't have anything on the screen though, so we're gonna have to get back in and do some work around that HDMI system. So let's do that next and see if we can figure it out. It is good news that we do have a working PS4 and we do have something on the screen, even though it's not what we want to see. All right, so I'm gonna get this torn back down and we'll re-inspect and test that HDMI system. And here we can see at least a problem. I'm not totally sure that it's the only problem, but it kind of makes sense. So we need to replace this resistor, and then hopefully after that it'll work. Okay, and back together. Let's turn it on. Come on, give us a signal here. It's all starting up again. That's good news. Come on. It's flashing on the screen, but still nothing. Now, after testing the HDMI system more, I couldn't find any problems with any of the other components. So usually in that case, what I do is I replace the HDMI chip. So I have a donor board here. I'm going to remove the HDMI chip from this board and put it onto the board we're working on. I'll be using my hot air soldering station to remove and replace the chip, and then I'll go through with my soldering iron and make sure each leg of the chip is soldered on solidly. So I've installed the HDMI port, I've replaced all the little diodes around the port that were missing, and I also replaced the HDMI chip, and then after that I spent some extra time just testing all the components around the HDMI chip and the HDMI port, and all of those are good. Everything as far as I can tell and can test is good. So I have high hopes. Let's see if it's going to turn on. If it doesn't, I don't think we'll be able to fix this one. Okay, it does turn on, but does it show anything on the screen? Come on. Oh, nothing at all. Okay, black screen. And we got it! Yes! So the first PS4 is fixed. I do need to install the software onto it, but I'll get that part done off camera. The next thing we need to do is test the disk drive and see if the disk drive works. Now, while I have this PS4 installing the system software, let's move on to the next one and see if we can fix number 2. And here we have PS4 number 2. It looks like somebody has tried to replace this HDMI port. I think we got some problems on the pins here. It looks like this one has all these little components installed, so we're not missing any there. That's good news. And then looking on the bottom side of the board, I can't tell if the HDMI chip has been replaced or not. There's a lot of flux around it. I think maybe this is the original though. So next, let's get under the microscope and check out these 19 pins and fix any soldering that we need to here. And then we'll see if there's anything else that needs to be done. And a lot of these pins need to be resoldered. There's a few that look fine. These ones over here though, that one's loose, that one's loose, that one's loose, that one's not bad. It looks like most of the others are soldered on decent enough. I'm gonna go through and resolder those first 3. And then also, actually, I'm just gonna resolder all of these just to make sure they're on there really good. And then other than that, let's get this board into a frame and see if it'll start up after this. So one thing that a lot of people miss when installing HDMI ports like this is when you look at the pins, they all look fine, right? They're all soldered on correctly, no bridge joints or anything like that. But when we flip it up like this, you can see right down there we've got a solder bridge. That bridge is connecting this pin and this pin, and this HDMI system will not work with that bridge there. So we need to clear that out. I'm just gonna use an iron and heat up these 2 pins at the same time. That'll probably be enough to clear it, and then we'll be ready to put this thing together. So now you can look down there and see that there's no solder at all down there. I'm gonna try and just use my large soldering iron and see if I can just put some heat on it and remove that solder blob. Yep, and there we go. But before we put together PS4 number 2, PS4 number 1 is all ready to test the disk drive. All right, and here we have the disk. Let's see if it'll take it in first. Okay, power to the drive, that's good. Does it spin up? Ah, it's not even gonna spin up. So we have to repair the disk drive before we can test it in the console and see if this disk drive matches with this motherboard. So next I'm gonna get the disk drive out and do that repair. Then we'll put it back in and see if it will actually play a disc. So first let's get our disk out using the manual eject screw. Oh, wow. So here we can see exactly why this disk drive is not working. This laser is completely clouded over. You can see that this plastic is pretty discolored. That's because this disk drive likely came out of a PS4 that was in an environment with a lot of smoke in it, and so that's what causes this lens to become cloudy. Sometimes you can clean these. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So let's give it a try. Oh, I don't know. That's not getting that clean. Yeah, I don't think this one is gonna work. The laser's definitely cleaner, but I can still see just kind of like a cloudiness to the lens. Normally what I would do with these is replace this laser itself, but since I do have some of these disk drives just laying around, I'm actually just gonna replace the disk drive, partially because it's easier, but a lot because it'll save me some time. So I'm gonna do that, put the disk drive into the PS4, and then we can test and see if this disk drive is matched to this motherboard. Now I've got a different disk drive installed. Let's see if it'll take it. It's taking the disk. It is spinning up, but will it read? Good news so far. I really hope this works. We basically just guessed out of 3 disk drive which ones match this motherboard. So far it looks like maybe, oh no, that's fine. This is just updating software. We'll update later. Good. Okay, and it's installing the game. So this disk drive is the one that matches this board. This PS4 is done. Let's move on to PS4 number 2 and see if that HDMI port is working. And another PS4 with a heatsink that is just completely clogged. This is super common if your PS4 is having problems overheating. This is one of the most likely causes. Look at that. There we go. But which disk drive should I put in this one? We did super good guessing on the last one, but can we guess correctly on this one? Looks like this disk drive was probably taken apart at some point. Mostly looks fine. Maybe we should go with the dirtiest one, which is this one. So we've got the disk drive installed. I did have to replace this ribbon cable again because whoever removed it just tore the ears off the cable because they didn't push down on the little locking tab. But I've got lots of those cables, so no big deal. Now I just need to install this power supply, and then we can try and power it up and see what happens. And here we go, PS4 number 2. Is it gonna turn on? Good news so far. Got a blue light. You can hear the hard drive. Come on, black screen. That's sort of good. Okay, PS4 is turning back off. That's normal. Oh, come on. Okay, we have a white light and just a plain black screen. Let me turn my switcher on and off. Ah, bummer. So we still have no HDMI signal. Now all I've done on this so far is resolder the pins on the HDMI port. So I need to go through and test all the little diodes as well as the HDMI chip itself. So I'm gonna get this all torn back apart so we can do that next. So here are all the pins we resoldered. And over here we have one problem here. This solder mount is not good. We need to resolder that. Also, it looks like somebody replaced this component. It should be green like this one, but it's black. So I'm guessing that might have something to do with our problem, but I need to get this replaced so then we can retest these diodes. So what I'm going to do next is test these diodes in diode mode on my multimeter. We got a 0.6, a 1.6. This one should also read 0.6. And a 1.2. And then the other way, we've got a 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. So do we have a problem with the diode, or is it another problem somewhere? So it reads 1.6 when it should read, actually no, that should read, yeah, that should read 0.6. And it should read OL right now. All of these should read OL one way and 0.5 or 0.6 the other way. So they're all at 0.5 right now. And then when I switch my leads the other way, we've got 0.6, 1.6, and 1.2. And then if we check this other one right over here, we've got 1.2 and 0.5. So usually when I find these diodes reading funny like this, it's usually a problem with the HDMI chip. So I'm going to replace the HDMI chip on this one. I'm going to do that part off camera since we've already seen it once, and then I'll come back and test the diodes and see if we can get normal readings. All right, and with that HDMI chip replaced, we've got 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, normal so far. The other way, we have 1.2, that's normal. 1.6, exactly the same readings as before. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do next is take off each of these diodes one by one, see if we have a faulty diode. So I was just about to start pulling these diodes off, and I noticed something. If you look at this diode, and this diode, one of them is different. This diode is installed backwards. These two have the line right here. This one has the line over here. That would explain the strange readings we're getting. So now, instead of removing each of these one by one, I'm just going to flip this diode around and then we'll take the readings again. Okay. We have 1.9. That's not a good start. They're all 1.9. What about the other way? They should say OL one way. 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Okay. What about this one over here? 0.5. Okay, so I'm guessing what might have happened is maybe since the diode was installed backwards, maybe that caused it to blow out when power was put to it. So let's try removing that diode and then see if we get the correct readings. So I removed all of these diodes and I got basically the same readings. So next what I did is I removed the HDMI port. Now let's test them again and see what kind of readings we get. So here we have probes one way. OL, that's great news. OL. And this should be 1.9. Yep, it is. And same with this one. Okay, and then we have 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. Those are the readings we're supposed to have. So apparently there was just a bad connection on one of these joints under here. Now that we have that HDMI port off, I'm just going to reinstall a new HDMI port, solder all the pins on, and then we'll put it back together and see if it works. There we go. Now we got the new port installed. I feel much better about this soldering as it is a lot cleaner anyway, so I'm glad I just replaced it with a new port. Now to get it back together and test. Now we have it all back together. Let's see if it's going to turn on. We got power, but do we have a picture on the screen? Still got a blinking blue light. Okay, and it is restarting. Okay, black screen. Oh, there we go. We got an image on the screen. So the HDMI system's fixed. Now we need to check the disk drive. So we've got the disk in the disk drive. It's spinning up, reading the game. Let's see what happens when we press to start it. That's a bummer. So on this PS4, we've still got a white light. The power button isn't responding, the eject button isn't responding, and the screen just went blank. Unfortunately, at least in my experience, I've found that these ones have a problem with the APU. And so unfortunately, this one is not going to be fully fixable. The good news is we did fix the HDMI system. We picked the right disk drive for this board. So, I mean, it's sort of fixed. At least we fixed what we could. But unfortunately, ultimately, this one is going to be non-fixable. But let's move on to PS4 number 3 and see if we can fix that one. Clearly, one of the issues here is we're missing a diode, and I believe this is a capacitor right here. This port also needs to be replaced. This is the original port and it's all bent up. So I'm gonna replace this port, get these little guys replaced, then we'll put it together and see what happens. But before we do that, I am gonna test these diodes that are on here and see what they test. It would be nice if we could make sure these diode circuits work before we do all the work to replace the port and stuff. Okay, for the first one we have OL. Second one we have 0.5. Let's test the first one again. 0.5, just a bad connection. Okay. And then down here we have 0.5. That is normal. Now we should have OL on all of them. OL, OL, and 1.9. Yeah, except for this one. This one, that's normal at 1.9, as previously discussed multiple times. So it looks like the HDMI circuit here is fine. So I'm gonna get that work done. Then we'll install it into a chassis and see what happens. And we got this port installed, all the pins soldered on. Now let's get this thing into a chassis and see if it'll start up and show display. And you already know the magic ingredient. There we go. And PS4 number 3 is all back together. Let's see if it'll turn on. Okay, we got a blue light. Nothing on the screen yet. I expect it'll take a minute to start up fully. Oh, I don't hear the hard drive running. That's no good. Come on, don't be a blue light of death. So we're just getting a flashing blue light. That's all this will do. I'm gonna try and replace the hard drive and just see if that happens to make it go to white light. But if it doesn't, then we're not gonna be able to fix this one. So let's try that real quick. Okay, powering on, blue light. There's no noise out of the hard drive at all. When a PS4 works normally, you'll hear the hard drive start up. It'll make a bunch of little clicking noises, not loud clicking noises, just kind of subtle clicking noises. And that tells you that the hard drive is working. But when you have a blue light of death, a lot of times the hard drive just, a lot of times you'll hear a little bit of clicking and then it'll just be quiet, kind of like we have right here. That's such a bummer. So for PS4 number 3, it's just a blue light of death. So this one is not going to be fixable. So out of 3, we fixed one and sort of kind of fixed another one, but ultimately 2 of them weren't permanently fixable. Unfortunately, that's just what happens sometimes with eBay, but in my opinion, you'll have much better luck with Whatnot. I'll put a link for them in the description so you can go check them out. If you like this type of video, you'll probably like the video where I tried to fix a broken gold Taco Bell edition PS4. I'll put the link for that up on your screen now so you can come hang out with me over there and see if I could fix that one. Thank you so much for watching today, and I hope you have a good one.